thank you so much. I know that it's not the most pleasant of evenings to be out and about, so thanks for bothering to come along. And I hope that it is an interesting evening for all of us. I am interested, before we kick off, to check with you who has actually used the business model canvas before. Okay, so a few people. And do you actually feel like you have a really strong understanding and sense of the power of it and how it can be used, or are you kind of earlier stages of playing with it? A few people who said that, yeah, sort of middle of the road? Okay. So at TDI, we use the business model canvas as really the foundational tool on which all of the rest of our work is built on trying to get enterprises to become sustainable over time and take on investment, so private capital, to grow and expand the work that they're doing. And I think that quite often the business model canvas itself is seen as a basic kind of tool. It looks quite simple. If you look at that page you have, it's like one page. You think, how can that be robust and a useful document? But we always refer to it as being deceptively simple. So it is a simple tool, but it is powerful. But you can also, if you don't know how to use it well, it can be simplistic and not a useful framework. So tonight, I am keen to explore with you a few sort of tips and tricks of things we've seen with kind of key things people in the social enterprise space can do as they try to build up a sustainable business model. Also to talk to you about some of the things that people commonly find quite difficult engaging in trying to make that transition from simply doing good or having a grant-reliant model to moving towards being sustainable. So there's some of the things that we'll be looking at. Interestingly, we find that the people most open to the notion that you can do good and make money at the same time tend to be younger people. So it is in the conversations that we have with people at universities or early in their career where they tend to, when that statement comes up, look at you like, yes, of course. Why would you do it any other way? And yet it's worth you knowing that that's actually not really common. There still are a whole stack of deeply embedded worldviews and ways of operating that are very different to that. So if you actually already have a mindset that says you are comfortable with and in fact want both a career and an enterprise and a business that does both of these things at once, you are already positioned with a mindset that will position you better to move towards creating one of these business models. It's interesting because often, when we look at the traditional ways of engaging, people have felt as if their options were you had to go to uni, get a good job, do that, be willing to step on some faces, be quite hard, earn some money, and one day when you had enough money, you could give back. And I think that is no longer the desire or the approach that people are necessarily taking. So this mindset of doing good and making money is at the heart of what we're doing at TDI, trying to prove out that that is possible. And I really encourage you to start your explorations, your businesses, your engagements in any work you're doing with that in mind. Before I go into the canvas itself and some of the tips and tricks, I want to just show you briefly a little video that will give you a sense about TDI without me having to go into too much of that detail for you. I think social enterprises are the future of business because of the way that they can address big social and environmental problems and do that in a sustainable way.
So what TDI is looking for in an organisation is we want to create an investable social enterprise. And for us that is through the lens of blended value. We want an enterprise that can deliver measurable social or environmental outcomes and deliver return on investment.
But the number one challenge social enterprises are facing is actually staying alive in the next 2 years. So having enough funding to keep them going, help them grow, help them change, help them evolve.
They are trying to not just deliver a commercially viable model or just run a charity. They're really trying to do both those things at once, and that's quite difficult.
The thing that excites me about this space is that there is so much goodwill. There are so many people working for change and transformation. There are so many people in the world who want to see inclusion and social justice. They want to see better environmental outcomes. And they want to harness the creativity of business to help achieve those things.
When you're starting up, it's really crucial to have organisations like TDI helping. So it was really critical for us in not only kind of being educated, but also just having that ongoing mentoring there whenever you needed it, not just in kind of bursts, but walking alongside you for a very long period of time.
I was really attracted to TDI because they were talking about investability as a key goal of the social enterprise journey, and I also find that the models that they use have helped me a lot in my professional development and also helping our enterprises go forward.
TDI is an organisation and a group of people that allows people to come into a space and learn not just from the mistakes but also from the experiences and the learnings of people that have come before them, and that's a really smart way to work and to help develop enterprise.
One of the things I found with TDI was the way that they force you to ask yourself those slightly difficult questions where maybe you think you know the answer, but by prodding and probing and asking more and more questions, you realise that there's more to it than you thought, and you end up with a better business model than you started.
You know, you can look at the brochures and the frameworks and the material on the website, and it's all fabulous. But I think what makes TDI special is the team. You know, Bessi and Isaac and Reed and Paul. They know their stuff, and they're not just technicians, but they know how to relate to people in a way that brings the best out of them.
The one thing, and I tell TDI on a regular basis, is we need more of you. And if I could have TDI in every capital city to be able to harness all of those enterprises and all of those entrepreneurs with great ideas, that would be amazing, because then we could start to create a bigger market.
For TDI, that ultimate goal, if you like, of what does success look like, is that we start to have a much broader pipeline of organisations that can take on capital.
We are unreasonable and we are uncompromising, but that's our point of difference, is that you can be sure that the questions we ask will enable you to be strong enough that you can pitch this to an investor.
I think the rally cry for this space is you can make money and do good. For us, it's getting to the whole of the capital market that is really the opportunity, but also what is necessary to scale up to tackle the kind of very large, complex problems that we want to solve.
So, our work is very much sitting in what we would call the pipeline development side of a broader impact investment market. I'm not sure how many of you have followed or engaged in some of the conversation around impact investment, but one of the things that's frustrating is that most of the energy, effort, money is going towards the supply side, so trying to encourage investors to invest or to set up funds. And in fact, our argument is that the issue is on the demand side. We have a big gap between where enterprises currently are and where they need to be if they're going to engage with investment dollars that they have to pay back. So that's the area where we work. That's what we're passionate about, is helping enterprises make that transition and build these kind of business models that enable them to engage with that. So the critical thing that we talk about is that we're trying to grow investable social enterprises. So I'm going to do a bit of clarifying tonight around what an investable social enterprise is, and then what we think of when we talk about social enterprises in this space. But there's three critical pieces, one of which is the business model, that we're looking at as we try to build up something that is investable. And they are mission. So this is the deal breaker for me. Mission is a central piece. There has to be at the core or the heart of the business a social or environmental mission. We also have to have a business model, a financial model, things that are actually demonstrating that there is a commercial part to this business that can actually drive the financial component. And then the third piece is around management. This is drawing our attention back to and reminding us that if we don't have the right people with not only the passion but the capability and the governance structures and the willingness for them to be held accountable on the social and financial returns they're generating, if we don't have that in place, it really doesn't matter how wonderful the mission is, how commercially viable the business model is, it's not going to work. So they're the three components that we're looking at. And in terms of just a basic definition, when we talk about investable social enterprises, we say that an investable social enterprise is an organisation with a central social or environmental mission, a commercially viable business model, and the right management to deliver both that mission and model. So tonight, obviously, we're focusing in on the business model part of what that unlocks for us and how central that is. Paul, who is my co-founder at TDI, talks about the business model as this elegant expression of how all parts of a business work together for success. And the reason why I've put this image of the business model canvas up here instead of the basic one that you have in front of you is that this graphic actually helps speak a little bit more to the relational dynamics of when you can use the canvas powerfully. Part of what it does is help you understand how different parts of your business interact with each other and how if you change something in this part of the business, you have to be aware of the effects in other components. And that is one of the powers of this tool as opposed to when people engage with business plans where they tend to cut and paste things under headings and change something here and forget that, oh, that will have a flow-on effect. So the framework here is showing you the slightly more relational side of the canvas, which is very important in terms of starting to grapple with how the tool works. One of the things that is really important to talk about when we bring up business modelling is that it's important that you learn this skill and that you think about your business model as early as possible. Quite often people come to us and they've done a stack of work or done some massive business plan or, engaged in different programs, and they've not only put a stack of their time in and effort, often they've spent money or had funding in the mix, and they come to us hoping that the commercial bit or trying to make it sustainable or bringing in investment can be tapped on at the end. The thing I want to encourage you about is that it doesn't work like that. If you bring an unsustainable business model and say, please help me bring on some investment so that it can plug the gaps in the model that aren't working at the moment, unfortunately I won't be able to help you. And in fact, we will have to go back to the beginning, model it up, figure out what is the business model that allows you to deliver whatever the social and environmental mission is you're wanting to achieve, and how do we do that in a way that has the commercial realities in place. So learn the skill and do the thinking around business modelling as early as possible. The other piece, and I think this was actually mentioned in some of the materials when you were registering for tonight, the other thing that's really interesting about the business model is that depending how you build your business model, it can help you start to engage with scale. Scale is a word that often gets used when you're talking about investment or sustainable business models. One of the clarifications I always like to make around scale in the social sector is to say that as you build up a great business model that is sustainable and has some of that commercial reality in it, we need to actually think carefully about whether scale is appropriate for your particular social enterprise. Quite often, The benefits of scale can be achieved through replication of a model, but not making it massive. And you do need to keep a distinction in your mind in the social space around whether you have the kind of model that is appropriate for scale, or whether there are things that could be learnt and replicated from your model elsewhere, but in fact some of the power of it would be lost if you tried to make it massive. So an example of that would be that if you have an organisation where part of what makes it work is the direct relationship you have at a grassroots level with people, and then you try to blow that model up, bring investment in and make it, some huge organisation where you've lost all contact with the grassroots or with the local community, the model that once worked may not work. So when you think about scale, really have some serious conversations and grapple with what is it about your model and does it fit scale or replication. Because as I said, replication can give you some of those benefits of economies of scale. You can connect up with other people in other areas. You can use the same back office. You can tap into things that are part of the appeal of scale. You can even work together around bringing in investment. But please don't assume that either investment is always the answer or that scale is always good. There is a distinction there. One of the other components that is really important to grapple with and think about when using the business model canvas, and it's a question that gets asked a lot, is about this is typically a tool that was used just for standard business. How do you use this in a way that actually acknowledges the social or environmental component of a social enterprise, and where does that fit in the canvas itself? No doubt you've probably seen versions of the canvas, like social lean versions and different creations that people have come up with that take components of the business model canvas and try and bring in the social aspects. We aren't fans of that because this is actually a powerful tool, and it's helpful to think about how to actually run and operate the business itself. And what tends to happen, if you mess with something that's actually designed really intentionally and well to do one thing, in the hope of bringing in another component, you can end up doing both of them badly. So we actually leave the canvas as is and train people how to engage with the canvas. But we have built a framework, an outcomes framework around the canvas that helps us to actually think about and see how the social stuff engages with our canvas. Now, let me just bring the whole thing up. Okay. I would have to have a much longer session to go into detail with you around this, so I won't go into each category in detail. But basically, if you think about you're working towards investment, one of the key components of impact investment is around measurability. So I say the two most important words in impact investment's definition is around intention and measurability. If you can speak to all of these aspects, so if you can talk to an investor about the context in which your social enterprise exists, speak to them in ways that demonstrate you know both who the competitors are, what the challenges are, what needs to happen in this space, what is going on and why you need to actually have your enterprise exist. That's a great thing. If you come down to look at these other categories, inputs, outputs and outcomes are basic things that whether it's in a theory of change or an outcomes measurement report, you would be talking about those. If we can identify very simply what the inputs are that are coming into the business, the outputs that are being created, and the outcomes in a way that is driving revenue. See the arrow down the bottom? What we want social enterprises to acknowledge is that whether you're taking funding, so a grant, or you're taking investment, there is something in your story that someone is actually engaging with you because you're promising and talking to the social outcomes you can create. That is part of why they're engaging, and you need to clearly articulate that in ways that help drive revenue on the bottom line. But the critical, most important piece that's there, and I'm going to remove all the others for the moment for the sake of clarity, is intent. So the short, quick answer to how you start to engage the social components or environmental components of your enterprise into working with the canvas is actually to start to think about intent. So this moves us into one of the things that I'm going to talk about as one of the traps that social enterprises often fall into. And this is about the fact that they don't distinguish or separate their intent for why they're doing this from the value proposition to the customer. So when I talk to a social entrepreneur and we're trying to just work with the canvas, if we don't have an intent conversation first, if we jump straight into training around the canvas itself, a few things happen. One is that people who are very strongly coming from the social side of the spectrum will say things like, this feels very mercenary. That's a bit, it's quite harsh. That's not why I come to work every day. That's, I don't operate like that. And they feel like it's too quickly and too strongly on the opposite side of the spectrum from where they're coming from. So if you jump into the canvas, that can happen. But what they also do is, as you speak to, so in terms of the sequence we go through the business model canvas, we start with customer segment, then jump to value proposition. When you get into value proposition and you say, so what is your value proposition to your customer? They will start to speak about why they're doing it, what it is that's important to them. So if it's an environmental angle and they feel passionately about plastic waste in the ocean, they will rave on and on about that as the value proposition. And they haven't separated out in their mind that may be one of the components that is, bringing a customer to engage with your enterprise, but it may not be, and it certainly may not be the first or main value proposition that you have. So this component of separating out in your mind intent and clearly articulating what it is you're doing and why. So think of it, you can call it purpose, mission, any word you want. But positioning that sitting above your canvas, it has to inform your canvas and whether the business you're creating is aligned with that. But it is a separate piece from then actually starting to flesh out the business and how that works and what the model is. The interesting thing about this kind of challenge and that separation of intent and value proposition is that it's actually very connected to the next trap, which is related to our customer segment. And it's about the fact that typically social enterprises, when engaging with the canvas, have in their mind assumed that the beneficiary is the customer. In most social enterprises we work with, that is not the case. Very rarely are they the only customer segment. They may be one of your customers, but what we have to start to do is actually come at the canvas in a way that says, okay, if I engage and say my beneficiary is the customer, there are automatic limitations on the commerciality and the viability of this business. Because if I have a service that actually costs me $45 to deliver and I have a beneficiary who can only afford to pay $5, I straight away say, well, there's no model here. There's no commercial model, can't be done. I'm going to be grant reliant and we're doing great stuff, so someone should give us some money. And I move on because apparently there's nothing I can do. If we separate out in our mind customer and beneficiary, we can say, right, so the beneficiary is a customer segment, but that can only pay $5 of that $45. What products or services are we delivering that are of value to other people where there is enough value in it that they would pay? What do we have that we haven't yet commercialised that could actually help engage this model? And who are those customer segments? Identify them and think about how they actually change your canvas. And I cannot overplay how important this is, because the amount of times where you hear people say there isn't a commercial model or there's not a business model for what we're doing, And yet if you then look at their services and say, oh, well, you know, surely if you're delivering that service, it's a counselling service and it's actually of really high quality, you've got great track record, wonderful staff, would there not be other groups who would pay for that? So we just need to change the way we think. It comes back to that mindset piece of engaging and thinking differently about what the canvas allows us to do. The next trap that social enterprises often fall into is actually not directly related to the canvas in terms of, you know, pulling it apart, but it is in terms of the viability components of the bottom line of the canvas. And it's that we fall into a trap that this obsession over many definitions with social enterprise that have a component that speaks about the reinvestment or redistribution of profit has to be part of what we do. I hear this all the time, not just at universities, although it does happen a lot at universities, but with people who will come and talk to you about an amazing social enterprise that is absolutely having a wonderful social or environmental outcome. And then they get to the end of their pitch and they say, and we give 50% of our profits to a charity in such and such, thinking that they have to tap that on and that makes them a social enterprise. Or, you know, some other piece that actually takes away from and makes it feel token and suddenly takes all attention away from the fact that they were doing great things in the core of what the business was. And this is a really frustrating thing just from a level of trying to build a sustainable business. But if you want to engage with investors, it actually sends a lot of unhelpful messages. So if you think about some of the definitions that focus in on profit, you can end up sort of coming across like you don't actually understand the financials of your business if you talk about that. Because there's two main issues that come to mind for me. One is, if you talk about giving away, distributing profit to worthy causes or other charities, then an investor can say, okay, but all you have to do is pay your staff more or up your costs and you can totally affect how much profit there is or is not in a business. Profit can be manipulated very easily. So if you're trying to tell me that the great bit about your business is only what you do with your profit, I'm not that impressed. And actually, I'm a little bit worried about that. The other issue that comes up is around the fact that, you know, with our financial components, if we're talking about that something is made a social enterprise because they reinvest the majority, if not all of the profits into the business and the purpose of what that business is about, I think you could pretty much put every small business in that category, because most small businesses aren't making amazing profits and they're pumping that money back in to the business to try to actually build up and strengthen whatever the business is about and trying to do. So it's an unhelpful obsession. The power of a social enterprise comes when actually the whole of what the business is about is doing good things. So what we would call an integrated business model, where just by it existing, even if you only break even, good things have happened in the world. That kind of business is worth backing. I want to be supporting and engaging with businesses, not because if they make a tiny percentage of profit, they'll give it away, but because they're doing great things in the world. So this aspect is both unhelpful, it makes you look naive, and really, if you keep talking or focusing on profit, what you do is keep social enterprise niche. We will only ever be a sideline, small part of a broader market if we limit ourselves in those ways around financials. So if you look at social enterprise, so I'm separating out now investable social enterprises, which we've already talked about, which is what we're trying to grow from just a standard social enterprise. So if we ignore the aspects around focusing on profit, at TDI we go quite broad. So we are looking for a social enterprise to be an organisation that at the heart of it has that social or environmental mission, so the same as an ISE, and that it has or is developing, so working towards having a sustainable business model. So I am agnostic to legal structure. I do not care if it is not-for-profit or for-profit. I care about what it is doing as a business. I also am not saying that all social enterprises have to already be sustainable, but I want to see that you are trying to build a model that is working towards having a sustainable business model. That means that you are over time freed from grant reliance, so that over time you have that confidence that your programs will continue. If someone happens to give you a grant, fantastic. Grants are wonderful. I am in no way saying that there isn't a role or a place for grants and for government funding. But if we can build a commercial model, should we not try and do that? There are so many things that sit in a grant reliance space that in fact don't need to. And if we could shift those to being more sustainable and commercially viable, that frees up the very limited pools of grant funding for the things that still need it or always will need it. That, I think, is an ethical responsibility for us to have at least examined and thought about as we build social enterprises. And this sort of leads into a tendency to think about the world as being black and white. So that piece where I said we're agnostic to legal structure. If we obsess over, is it for-profit or not-for-profit? Is it doing good or making money because you can only do one? None of these things actually get us closer to the aspects that we're passionate about. So whatever your thematic or your issue is that you are passionate about, if you obsess over or engage with the world like it is black and white, you are limiting what you can achieve. And this goes to the fourth trap, which is about being a purist rather than a practitioner. So I am a big fan of practitioners. In a university context, I'm not taking away from the role of the academic components to what we need in society. But in social enterprise, I think one of the things that you have to keep in your mind is that you are not about saying everything that is in this category is wrong and we are right. You are actually trying to practically get out there and demonstrate and show what's possible. Most people do not have either the disposition or the entrepreneurial bent that you guys have. And if you don't demonstrate and be a practitioner who actually shows people what is possible, then the world won't change. And sitting and being a purist and having academic arguments over what businesses should and shouldn't do and how others should spend their money doesn't actually move us closer to sorting this out. We have to practically get involved because the fact is, I'm sure you know as well as I do, that there are enough people who talk and do nothing. You know, we talk about this talk to action ratio. We don't need any more people who talk and talk and talk and do nothing. We need more people who are practitioners who get out there and try it. So I would encourage you to do something and to lean on that side of the equation. You will make mistakes, that is fine, but err in the direction of practitioner, not purist. Now to be a bit more positive, going to go through a few tips for you around both the business model and engaging with shifting your social enterprise, whether it's an idea or an existing enterprise, towards being both more sustainable or investable. The first one is our area of passion, which is around the business model itself. And it's about learning the art of business modelling. I don't want people to come to a workshop and do a business model. I want people to learn to do business modelling. because this is not something that you're going to do once, get it right, laminate it and put it on the wall and you're done. Part of the reality of running any business, but the added complexities with social enterprise mean that you absolutely have to be able to do this, is that you need to be able to be responsive. You need to be able to know where to look, what to change if things don't work. So understanding the tool and really starting to separate out in your mind the difference between a business model and a business plan. There is absolutely a place for business plans, but they are an execution document. They are not something that you do first. They are not the piece that you do and test and refine and iterate. They are at the point of execution. Give me the detail on what you're going to do. Business modelling is the foundational initial piece that you have to get good at. And so having that distinction is important. And if you think of some of the jargon that is going around at the moment at a federal level of the obsession with innovation and being agile and what else are we? Disruptive, all of those kind of words. In this context, with the business model canvas, those things are actually what you should have as part of your practice. Ignore the fact that they're jargon and that most people are talking, not doing. But for you as an entrepreneur, and engaging with the business model canvas itself, the actual aspects of having the right disposition, of being lean, of being responsive, of saying, you know what, I thought that this was how it was going to play out. And in my business modelling, it all looked great and it made money. But as I now engage with customers, the reality is very different. For TDI, for example, when our first business model canvas, which wasn't just made up, I had tested with stacks of different people and engaged around who would pay for what people wanted, what the gaps in the market were. We had a customer segment that was around philanthropists, and down in the revenue component, we had a stack of philanthropists who had said to me, I don't want to support the establishment of TDI, but once you're set up, I would pay for an entrepreneur to go through your program. So I said, great. So I had how many people who had said that? How many people had said that? I did my sensitivity analysis. I was very, very conservative and boiled the numbers down and said, I think of all the people who said that, 10 of them will probably follow through. So in my first business model canvas, I had 10 of them following through to pay for someone to go through the program. There was other revenue streams, but that was really important and I really needed that. Guess how many actually followed through? One, absolutely, one. So, and there was a lot that had said they would. I thought I had been very conservative. So you have to accept that when you go in and you build things, they do not always come. And in fact, if you cannot go back and you don't know how to use the tool and you can't shift and move and go, oh boy, that's a big gap in my business model now. Where am I going to get that revenue from? What other customer segments are there? What am I doing that is of value that someone might pay for? You're going to be in trouble. So being responsive, agile, all of those annoying words, you actually need to be those. And the business model is a beautiful way for you to quickly, cheaply engage with a tool or a framework that helps you think about and change and move your business. The second tip is a quote I actually heard from a lecturer many years ago, where he said, if you don't have a stomach for disequilibrium, you won't be able to lead in the 21st century. And I think that is absolutely true. It is also true in the work that we're all doing in the social space. You have to get used to being uncomfortable. You need to realise that it is not neat. It is not, we are not working in a place where you can pull things off the shelf, where it is known and you can clearly say, these are the exact steps of how this will play out. We are having to be vulnerable, having to push boundaries and be pioneering. We are trying new things, and with that comes a lot of discomfort, a lot of sleepless nights. You will age drastically, but it is something that you're going to have to get used to if you want to play and thrive in this space. So the other component that I think sits with this juggling act of getting used to things not being comfortable is that I really believe, I've always called myself a generalist, and some people, particularly a few years ago, used to kind of say, oh dear, why would you do that? That's not a good thing to call yourself. I actually think that we are in an era where we need generalists more as an overarching category than we need deep expertise. You absolutely have to have people who have expertise and you call on them at certain points. But in the work we're doing, if you can be a generalist and if you can hover across and spot opportunities, connect dots and use something like the business model canvas, you are very powerfully positioned to create change, to actually make the most of an opportunity, and ultimately to bring about amazing things that could otherwise not have happened if you were obsessively narrow in your expertise. So be a generalist and proud of it. The last tip is around being strategic. You would be surprised the lack of strategy that is out there. I remember I used to always assume that people who were in really senior positions must be so clever and they know what they're doing. The fact is they don't, and they're not clever. In most senior rooms you go into, it is very underwhelming once people open their mouths. Strategy is central, and if you can learn to be strategic, and I'm going to explain what I mean about when I use the word strategy, but if you can be strategic, you are positioned very well. So I steal all my good ideas are from my husband because he's very clever. This is his. So it actually has its roots back in ancient Greek philosophy, so some very clever people. But the way that Brad talks about strategy is that there's three components. There is the what, then there is the so what, and the now what. If you look at most people who think they're strategic or who try and impress you with how clever they are, they're usually good at the what. So they can throw lots of stats at you, they can tell you what's happening, there's a lot of, clever things being thrown around. So there's a level of intellect that comes with what. But a lot of those people never step down to the next categories. So if we go to the so what, this is a very critical skill of synthesis. If you cannot synthesize all of that what and start to make sense of it and pattern it and bunch it and get some actually helpful information out of it, your what is not that useful. So the so what is the synthesis. Then my favourite piece, and which is the piece that most people hate, is now what. And I always refer to that as the courage to choose. If you don't have the courage to choose something and do it, then all of the thinking and talking in the world is actually useless. So if you have in your mind, always continue to ask why, drive to action, but having that very simple what, so what, now what in your mind as you do anything, and it's actually not just in the social enterprise space, will actually be something that will be very helpful as you engage, whether it's with investors, customers, or whoever. If you can answer those questions about your business, about your decisions, it will be incredibly informative. So, just to remind you, the 4 tips were around the traps, were not distinguishing your intent from your value proposition, confusing your customer and beneficiary, being sucked in by definitions of social enterprise that focus in on profit, and being a purist instead of a practitioner. And the tips were around learning the art of business modelling, cultivating a stomach for disequilibrium, and being strategic. I'm not sure how many of you have followed or read some of Steve Blank's work, but I think this is a very important last quote to leave you with, which is that no business plan survives the first contact with customers. There are no facts in the building, so get the hell out and talk to customers. All of this work that you do, learning to use the canvas, is helpful to a point. Testing, piloting, prototyping, and then having those iterations is critical. So do not assume that that first canvas will work. Do not fall in love with it. Get out of the building and test it with customers. Thank you very much.